I just want to say I feel so supported this morning already. We've been on here 8 minutes and I'm like, you guys are awesome. But thank you for everyone that is helping me this morning. You guys don't see all the messages because there's some other ones popping up directly, but it's a good morning here. We'll just leave it at that. So anyways, I had a friend of mine who had a trauma coping system, and I already had my master's degree in therapy and was working with couples, because that's what my degree is in, is marriage and family. And they don't teach about dissociation in graduate school. It's just not really a thing. So sometimes when I work with lay people that work with dissociation, they feel so under-equipped because they don't have a degree. And I'm like, listen, people with a degree are not taught this. So you're literally starting at the same place as someone with a degree because it's just not commonly known. And so my friend invited me to come to her counseling session with her so that I could learn more about dissociation and be a support for her. And for those of you that work with it, because I know we have a lot of counselors and prayer ministers on here, what most of the stories I hear is once you learn about it, suddenly God brings you the people and you just start meeting people or realizing that your clients do have dissociation, and it just sort of happens. And that was very much the case with me. My mind is very strategic by nature. And so understanding trauma coping systems was not hard for me to grasp. One of the things that I say all the time is that every trauma coping system is exactly the same, and they're all completely different. And what I mean by that is the principles that guide the trauma coping system is exactly the same. And that's why what we're going to talk about today is the same from person to person. But what's completely different is kind of how it manifests, how it looks, the particular parts that develop, the particular jobs that they do, that can vary. But if you learn the principles behind the dissociation, then you can work with any system with those principles. God designed it. He designed it, and he is consistent, and he is strategic, and it's not random. It can feel very random when you're living with the system or when you're helping someone with a system. In fact, not just random, it can feel chaotic, and it can feel overwhelming and like there's no rhyme or reason. But that really isn't true. And if you're living with it, sometimes you need somebody on the outside to be able to help you kind of navigate it and find what is happening and what's the purpose. I'll have clients ask me that all the time, like, okay, tell me again, what is happening? Like, where are we in this process? And sometimes it's really clear, sometimes it's not. That's okay, because I know we're moving forward. It's hard. That's kind of the bottom line of that, is it's hard. But God is consistent in what he does. And so you just kind of got to stay the course a little bit. So I am going to try today not to go through what is dissociation, because we did that in our last training. If you did not see that training, if you were not here, it was a 4-part training called Treating Yourself Well. And all 4 parts are on my YouTube channel. And so you're able to go and watch those videos there. I do some editing between the live event and when I upload. And part of that's for privacy. Sometimes people ask questions that I don't necessarily need everybody on YouTube to hear. And then sometimes it's just for the flow of the video. And so live is better because you get the unfiltered. It's 9 o'clock in the morning, Melissa, and I've had half my coffee. That's what you get if you come live. And if you go to YouTube, you get the slightly more polished version. So props to you guys for sticking with me through this morning. Integration is a crazy, crazy word right now. It's very hard to find information on integration. A lot of sources out there really kind of gloss over it. When I first started working with DID, before I kind of broadened that out to the term trauma coping system. I did a lot of research trying to find out. I mean, that's what we all do, right? Whether you are working with it or whether you have dissociation, you're like, what is the goal here? Like, what's my prognosis? What are the chances that I don't have to be this way forever? And so I feel like integration is kind of one of those first concepts that people look at. And it's just hard to find information on it. I found a small paragraph in one of the many books that I looked at, and I'm like, what? This is all that there is out there? And as I've done this work for a couple decades now, I realize kind of why that is. A lot of people, and I don't just mean survivors, but I mean counselors, prayer ministers, psychiatrists, like people, a lot of people don't even believe that integration is a thing. And a lot of people have never seen it. They've never experienced it in their practice, or they've never experienced it for themselves. They don't know anyone that's experienced it. And so it just seems like a bit of this fairy tale or far off process. And one of the things that I find get people will, I want to be careful with my words there. One of the I guess one of the ways that people rationalize it is, well, maybe integration, maybe wholeness is just a high level of cooperation internally. Like if I can just reach that high level of cooperation, then I'll be doing good. Well, if you can reach that, you're doing better than good because that's a really hard goal. And if that's your goal, that's fine. High level of cooperation is it takes a lot of work to get to a high level of cooperation. And if you have a smaller system, which smaller, I would say a few dozen parts, maybe up to 50 parts is a smaller system, a high level of cooperation is possible. If you have a history of really severe abuse, and you have maybe hundreds or thousands of parts, a high level of cooperation is going to be next to impossible without some kind of integration happening first. So as people have kind of gone through this process, a lot of people have kind of settled in with high level of cooperation as their goal. And again, if that's your goal, that's completely fine. Some people find the thought of integration really scary. And so they're not sure that they even want to go for integration. So when I talk about integration, let's talk about some terminology here. One, I kind of pair that with wholeness. In talking about, we have all these different self states, all these different parts. And for full integration, because you can have partial, we'll talk about that. But for full integration or wholeness, it's when all of these parts come together and you're just one self state now. Now, it's important to distinguish because we have what's common in a few different modalities, kind of two different categories. One would be self states or alters, and those are more trauma parts. They're located in the back of the brain. And then we have the primaries, which are located in the prefrontal cortex, because remember, all this is happening in the brain, in the front of the brain. The primaries are the ones that are going to feel most like yourself, that are going to feel your actual chronological age you're going to feel most connected to. The trauma parts back here tend to be a little bit more disoriented from time. They tend to react versus reason because that's not where the reasoning part of your brain is. And they don't always know the trauma's over, and they're not always connected to present day life. So it's kind of a little bit of a different perspective that you experience between these self states that exist more back here and your prefrontal. It's very interesting as I've worked with people. So I don't talk about the brain stuff too much. I don't talk about neuroscience too much with my clients. But as I've worked with them and done healing prayer with people over the years, I will have people say things like, wow, after we did that prayer, I felt something in my head move from here to here. And I'm like, oh, that's very interesting because that's what neuroscience says just happened. But they don't know that, but they literally experienced a shift in their brain when we went through that process. And so there's a lot of movement that happens internally. And we're going to talk about that as the primary thing today. I've mentioned high level of cooperation. So if that's where you are and you're like, I don't want to lose my parts, I love my parts. I've worked with many people that were in that state, and that's completely fine too, because this is your journey. And integration, okay, we're going to talk about that in a minute post integration. So I'm just going to put that off. But the goal for today is to just talk about this idea of full integration. So one of the things that gets people when they start thinking and talking about integration, one of the reasons that it feels scary, especially to parts, often the primaries are like, please, can we just integrate these parts so my life will be more manageable, because then I can make my own choices and I can do my own things. Not quite that easy. But the primaries tend to embrace it more, and the self states can often panic, and they think, what does that mean? Like, do I just die? Do I just go away? Like, that is scary to think of, just going into nothingness. And so that fear can sometimes make it difficult to even have a conversation about integration. If any of you guys are feeling that today as you're listening, if it's overwhelming, you can turn this off. But I'm going to start right off by saying parts don't die. That is not possible. Sometimes in a trauma situation, a self state may appear dead. So they may appear limp or just kind of laid out, or you may even see them fall over as if they died. It's not physically possible for that to happen. As long as the person's body is alive, all of their trauma coping system is alive as well. Integration is not death. I like to call integration the retirement party. That is where the parts that have done all of their really hard work retire. That's where they've done their job to keep this person alive, to keep them functioning, to try to protect them from danger. And integration is like a promotion. It's an upgrade. It's a retirement party. It's fun and it's good. And I've got some really fun stories to help illustrate that for you. They can come back. So integration is not a permanent state always for these parts. And I've got a couple stories on that one for you as well. So let's do those stories first before we move on to the next section. So integration is just fun. It really, really is, but it can be scary. And so I want to talk to you guys about a few experiences I've had with my clients where I have got to speak with parts post integration, which is just, I think, one of the best things. I'm so glad that Jesus has allowed that to happen in a few different sessions. So 2 clients in particular I'm going to refer to, and any client stories I tell today, I have their permission to share their stories. And of course, I'll use information that's not identifying, but so one of my clients I worked with years ago, she's full, whole, integrated, present day, has been for, I want to say maybe 10 years or so. So it's been quite a while. She had a smaller system. She was diagnosed with DID, and she did not have ritual abuse. So that kind of gives you a little bit of context of her system. And she had all of her parts integrated slowly over time. So we're going to talk about the different ways they integrate here in just a few minutes. But they integrated kind of in small groups or pairs over time until she had her final integration. And all of her parts went into her heart. You can say heart, mind, body. It doesn't really matter what you say. I know, honestly, I say different things with different clients, but they all integrated into one place. And so she was living like that and kind of adjusting to it. She went to the hospital to do just like a routine checkup on something. And while she was at the hospital, and she's like in her 20s at this point, she had an unexpected heart attack. And the medical, people, everybody was freaking out because this was just really unexpected. Doctors were flooding the room. She was unconscious. And during that process, 3 of her integrated parts popped out. And they were able to, revive her, stabilize her. And we had session a couple of weeks after that. It was very interesting. The 3 parts that popped out, first of all, Jesus said, because I do listening prayer with her, If you're not familiar with listening prayer, let me just say in short, that's just where when we're working together, we pray, but we spend more time listening to what God has to say than we do necessarily praying ourselves. And God does a lot of healing through those moments and through those times. If you want more information on that, I'll do this because what I've discovered in these trainings is usually about half of the people who attend don't know about listening prayer. So I'll just, on the notes I send you, I'll put something at the end where you can learn more about listening prayer and you can look up a link. So we were doing listening prayer and listening to Jesus. And what he had said was that if those three parts had not popped out, she would not have survived. That she needed those three parts to unintegrate to help her get through that. Now, he didn't explain it any more than that, and I have no other explanation than what he said, so we'll kind of leave it at that. But what was very interesting to me and maybe helpful for you was I got to talk to those three parts about what it was like to be integrated. And what each of them said was it was amazing. One of the parts, who is one of her primary protectors, told me, I am here for her. Like, literally, I know I was created to help her and protect her. So I am here for her as long as she needs me. But as soon as she is recovered, I want to get back to where I was because that was the most peace I have ever felt in my life. And I'm like, wow, that's amazing. Another part, who was a little girl and had most of my clients' trauma memories, one of the pieces of her trauma as a child is she wasn't really allowed to have an education and learn. And her mom would just drop her off at places. A friend, a family member, even take her to the hospital and like admit her under false pretense if the mom got overwhelmed and just didn't want to deal with her. And so she missed out on a lot of schooling and a lot of education, but she loved to read. And so this little girl said that when she was integrated, she had this her own special room, kind of like her own bedroom space with all of her favorite things, but she had stacks of books all around her. And she could just read and read and read all she wanted. And she just glowed when she talked about it. And she kind of said the same thing. I'm here as long as I need to be here. But then I want to get back to where I was because it was so fun. Like she was having the time of her life. And then the third part was very much the same, saying, yeah, I'm here too. Whatever she needs, I'm here for her, but I want to get back in. Like, how amazing is that to be able to hear those stories from parts and to know that life for them doesn't just stop. That's why I call it a retirement party, because sounds like retirement to me, right? You're not having to do that heavy job of protecting and of trying to watch out for all the danger and do all of that. The primary has learned how to do that, and now these self states can enjoy their life, enjoy what time they all have left. So another client had integration. I still work with her and her parts are still integrating. She has DID and she does have a history of ritual abuse. She had a part in particular that came out, this has been many years ago, who was actually involved in a ritual situation. And just if you're not familiar with my teaching style, I don't give any graphic details. I will give you kind of a broad picture like I just did so you have context, but I'm not graphic. So this part came out through a memory and we were doing listening prayer again. And this part was able to receive some healing and get rescued from the memory. It was a really, really intense session. And I found with some parts, there tends to be a greater intensity with them when they are, I don't know, like more, whatever it is that their conflict is that they're dealing with is really pivotal to the whole system. And those sessions tend to be a little bit extra intense when it comes to that healing process. And so his was that way. And I'm going to call this part David. just so I have a name for him. And so he was able to call on Jesus and get rescued out of that memory. And he was around for a little while, but he integrated into the primary in a group, a pretty good sized group. And so that's amazing. What's been interesting about David is Jesus has actually brought David out of integration several times to help other parts that were either scared to integrate or scared to talk to Jesus, which is really common with dissociation. And Jesus has brought David back. And David has almost become a bit of a legend among the whole trauma coping system, where if you mention him, often parts will be like, oh, I've heard about David. Like he integrated, right? Like they don't really know his story, but they've heard about him. And as David has come back, maybe, I don't know, 4 or 5 times over the past decade, he's been a little bit older every time. He was just a little boy, maybe 7 or 8 when he integrated. And the last time we saw him, he was a full grown man. And so part of that integration process is growing, being kind of getting caught up to the primary and the primary's age and the primary's level of maturity. And so that happens in integration as well. But he's been able to come back and talk about, I've heard him talk to other parts about what integration is like. And for this client, integration is kind of experienced as every part has their own space. Like they live in a big house internally, and every part has their own room, but then there's also living space where they can all be together. And there's an outdoor area where they can play and where they can have fun together. And so they're able to, they don't have to just integrate and suddenly be squished in with a bunch of other parts, but they can integrate and have their own space or be with other parts. But it's all peaceful. There's no trauma there. There's no pain there. There's no jobs. Again, it's the retirement home. It's the beach house where you get to go and live your dreams, get to do the things that you never got to do before. And so it's been fun between those 2 clients and a few other experiences I've had with clients to be able to hear post-integration stories and how these parts are experiencing life. So if any of you have parts that are scared about the integration process, I hope that that will help you a little bit to see that it's for the parts, it's not a scary thing. It is a joyous celebration, and it is really peaceful and really, really good. So integration, as I've kind of already alluded to, can happen in different ways. I've had it happen I would say the minority of the time, only a small handful of cases, where it has been full integration, every part all at once, even with small systems. In fact, I only have one client in mind where it was truly a full integration, everybody all at once. There may have been more than one, but there's only one that I can think of where it happened that way. And her process was really beautiful. For her integration, Jesus actually, she had again a smaller system. She didn't have ritual abuse or a lot of spiritual abuse in her past. And Jesus actually spoke with each part, like gave them a mission and a purpose when he integrated them and greeted them like they had their retirement party speech and were able to integrate one at a time. And so it was fun to hear that. And I think those parts were able to kind of release their responsibilities through those words that Jesus gave them. So it is possible. I would say not if you have hundreds or thousands of parts. I mean, I suppose that's possible, but I would not, with what I know about dissociation, I would say that's probably not going to happen all at once. That's going to happen in sections. But it is possible with smaller systems to have just full and complete integration. What is far more common in my experience is for parts to integrate in either small groups or what I call levels. So the small groups would be like, let's say you have, and I'm just going to pick low numbers because some of you, the big numbers don't throw you off because you are accustomed to that. But others of you may have already been freaked out when I said a small system is 50 parts. So for the sake of the people that might be a little bit Deer in the headlights right now. I'm just going to pick some small numbers. All right. Well, what I consider to be small numbers. So let's say you've got 20 parts you're working with. Integrating in small groups would be 3 of those parts, 5 of those parts integrate all at once. Maybe a part integrates, and then the others are still kind of left there working. And that's completely fine for that and very common for that to happen. When I talk about groups integrating in levels, that would be more, we have the 20 parts and they all are kind of around the same conflict or the same type of abuse or the same aspect of the story. And all 20 of those parts receive healing and they are able to integrate and they all integrate. And then a new level of parts is next. So another group of 20 comes up to work with. And that is also very common. So it doesn't always happen all at once. And that, I think that's a really healthy thing because we're going to talk about the post-integration work that's involved here in just a little bit. But doing it all at once at one time would be honestly too overwhelming for most people that I know. And so even though it feels like, man, if we could just do it all at once, life would be different. Yeah, life would be different, but different is not always easier. And so you're both the Lord knows if he's guiding your process, what you can handle and what's good for you, but also he's wired it into your body, soul, and spirit to kind of intuitively know what you can handle and what you can't handle. And so work towards integration, but allow it to happen at a natural pace so that you are not overwhelmed by it. One of the big things that I don't know if anyone that I have worked with has done this over the years. Probably not anyone who I've worked with very long, but I've definitely heard of other people that have, quote, forced their integration. That does not work. You cannot force an integration because there are mechanisms, internal mechanisms in place, defense mechanisms, protective mechanisms that keep parts separate. And those have to be dealt with before you can integrate. And so when people try to force integration, and even if they say, because you may hear someone say, I just made my parts integrate, like I forced them to integrate and now I'm whole. More than likely, what's happened is just a bigger wall was built, a giant wall was built, and all those parts are behind that wall. So that person is unaware of it. And the system is still there, it's still active. But denial is incredibly powerful and can make it seem as if a full integration has happened that was forced. And that's not how the brain works. It's not how we're wired. And as we talk about post-integration here in a few minutes and the indications of full integration, I think you'll be able to understand why that's not possible. Trust God with the process. It's really, really hard to go through this work. And I love to talk about healing. I love to talk about God's design. But the reality is, if you're in the middle of the storm, if you're in the middle of the darkness, it's not easy. And it's kind of like one of the analogies that I use. Let's see if I have anything good here to illustrate it. I'll just hold up a book, I guess. So it's kind of like if you are kind of right here, if you're traveling down this path of healing, right? But all of this is just covered with darkness. And it's the battle, it's the chaos internally, it's the racing thoughts, it's the protector parts, it's the big emotions, it's the memories that keep coming. Like so many things make up this darkness, not just evil, but just a lot of internal stuff makes up the darkness. If you're in the middle of that, you can't tell if you're even close to healing or not. Like you can't even tell if you're going the right direction or not because it's just so overwhelming, like being in a dust storm or a blizzard. Like who knows if you're even still going north? Like we don't even know. That's why it's helpful to have somebody on the outside, a counselor or a prayer person that's guiding you through. But you just kind of have to trust God, that God is going to get me there, because this, looking around me, it looks exactly the same as it did last week and last year and 5 years ago. And am I even making progress? And that is a normal feeling. And that's why it's important to be able to trust God to some degree. A lot of times, people that have a trauma coping system struggle with, well, let's be real. People, humanity, often struggle with trusting God. This is not an isolated thing to dissociation, but with trauma and with so many different self states and belief systems internally, that can really make it difficult to trust God. And so I encourage you to work on trusting Him, but even if it's only just a tiny, tiny bit at a time, just a tiny, tiny bit is okay. You don't have to have a whole mountain of faith, right? Mustard seed, that's pretty, pretty tiny. Work on growing it, but trust that, okay, I don't know how. This feels impossible to me. And I don't even know if I'm going the right direction. Only God knows, but God knows, right? And God can work through the impossible. That's just really important when you are going towards integration. And be very hesitant to, if you have an integration experience, be very hesitant to just stamp it, seal it, full integration, done. Because what I've seen more times than not is a whole group will integrate and it will feel done, but then a whole nother group comes up. And one of the reasons that that happens is because of these internal conflicts that keep parts separate. You can only handle so much at one time. I mean, we are human, we are not infinite, we do not have infinite capacity. And we cannot sometimes handle all of the conflict that's there. And so a whole group may integrate and it may feel amazing. And you may even experience some of these post-integration indicators that I'm going to talk about in a minute. But you got to give it a little bit of time and just see, is this everybody? Are there other parts? Sometimes I've even seen big groups integrate and then there's just like one or two parts left. So it may not be a whole nother level of parts. It may just be one or two parts that just hold something that's kind of pivotal or something that needed to be separate for some reason. And those kind of, or maybe they were just too nervous to come up. They needed to see what was going to happen to the others first before they moved forward. There's a lot of reasons, but I just really caution you, if you have a really big integration experience, to just stamp it, seal it, and go on. I have a client that calls that microwaving. She's like, I was microwaving again. I was trying to do the process too fast. I was trying to shortcut. I was trying to just make it get done like that. And it's like, this is way more of a slow cooker situation than it is a microwave situation. And so it's important to let the process happen. God designed the process. Let the process happen. I know it's hard and I know you just want to get there. You just want it done, but patience is going to help it be done right. There's a big difference between microwaving something and cooking it in the oven or on the grill or in a slow cooker, right? My daughter's, and then we've talked about pop outs too. And those would be the parts that have fully integrated that then pop out. Sometimes if you don't embrace integration cautiously, then if you have a pop out, so maybe parts integrated and then they come back, or if you have a whole nother group of parts or another couple parts that can come up, what can happen is that can trigger shame and denial are two of the big things I see that trigger. If you're just dead set, nope, this was the integration, this is final, I worked hard for this, I am done. Then you have a pop out or you have new parts. Either one of those things can just trigger this, what did I do wrong? Like I thought I did it right. Am I broken again? Did I ruin everything? So that shame can be there. Or the denial of, this isn't a part. Nope, because I'm whole. I'm not going to believe that this is true. This is just a trick. It's just my imagination. So that creates denial, right? Which then pushes those parts to the back and is going to make your process even longer in dealing with them. You just have to be open to, okay, I'm going to deal with whatever happens. And you don't know until you've gone quite a while without pop outs, without new parts. Like I would say even a year without having pop outs or a new system come up. Then maybe we could call it full integration. You just have to be cautious so that if you do have something happen, it doesn't throw you for a loop. So here's some indications of a significant integration. So I mean, this probably has also been maybe about 10 years ago. I actually did a support group, just like a 4-week support group for people who had fully integrated. So not just a significant integration, meaning a lot of parts, but people who had full integration and wholeness. And we did a support group and we went around and talked about, what does this look like for you? What has it felt like? How did you know? And of course, when I'm working with someone and they do have a significant integration, those are questions that I'll ask one-on-one, like what has changed? And we ask that because there's a lot of post-integration work that has to be done. When you fully integrate, if you're working with a counselor or a prayer minister, I encourage you, and we're going to talk about this too. There's so much to say, I just get ahead of myself. Don't just ditch your counseling because you're going to need some post-integration work. So in that post-integration work, I've asked all these questions, but there's a few just commonalities that come up that help me know if there's really been a significant integration versus parts just got stuffed. Because if they just got stuffed, you're not going to experience most of these things. And this list will be on your notes when I send out the video. One of the big things I hear, there's 3 really big things, and then there's a few others that I hear here and there. One is time moves slowly. So almost without fail, I will have people say something like, do you have any idea how long a day is? Like, I just don't even know. Like, I think it should be 5 o'clock at night and it's 10 in the morning. Like, the day just goes by so slowly. Another lady told me, do you know it actually only takes 15 minutes to vacuum the living room? Tell me more. She's like, before integration, it would take me at least 2 hours. Like everything I did just took forever. And now it's like I'm done with chores and I still have the rest of the day. She's like, it's so weird. So one of the reasons why time moves slower is one, you're less distracted. So in the case of vacuuming, it doesn't take 2 hours to vacuum a living room. She did not live in a mansion and it did not take 2 hours, but you get distracted easily. You have parts that are popping out, wanting to do this and wanting to do that. She had thousands of parts. And so for her, getting anything done was like, how do you do that with a committee that large, right? Because everything shiny is distracting or anything stressful is distracting. And so it would just take her a really long time to accomplish anything. So that's one reason, is there are fewer distractions when you're integrated. So when you go to do a task, you just do the task and then it's done. And the second reason is because if you have one person that's living 24 hours, it's going to take 24 hours, right? If you have, for the sake of math, we'll say 4 people living a 24-hour day, each person could live 6 hours of that day. So to this part, a day feels like 6 hours. It doesn't feel like 24 hours because they're only living a piece of the day. Other parts are living other pieces of the day. So then when that person integrates, suddenly they thought 24 hours felt like this, but that was only 6 hours. 24 hours actually feels like this. So it makes the day feel like the time goes by slower because they're fully present instead of just coming and going. So I hope that that's clear. When we do questions in a few minutes, I can clarify that a little bit more if you like. But that change in time goes by at a different pace, is one of the indicators of a significant integration. Another really common indicator is your mind is suddenly much quieter than it was before. Now, if you're working through a healing process with dissociation, you understand that you have a lot in your mind that's not your own thoughts. It's parts talking, parts arguing, parts being mean. There's a lot going on in your brain all the time. And you kind of understand that a lot of that is parts, not just your own thinking, but their thinking too. But most people I have found don't realize how much of what happens in their mind is related to their dissociation until they integrate. And they're like, what? Like, my mind is so quiet. And regardless of how much people wanted to integrate and wanted to be done with it, almost without exception, people will start to experience loneliness because it's so quiet in their mind. And it's like, kind of like if you think of someone that lives in the big city, maybe they live in New York City and the buzz of traffic is always going and lights are always on. And then they move to the country and it's like, where's the noise? Like, it's too quiet. I can't sleep. It's too quiet. And then the third really common indicator is a significant change in forgetfulness or day-to-day memory loss. So again, in that group that I had, one of the ladies said, she goes, it's amazing. I put my keys in my purse and they're still in my purse later. I put my purse on the table and I know it's on the table later. Like she was had so many parts that things would just move around all the time. It's like, again, if we have all these different self states, you may put your keys in your purse, but somebody else may be digging through your purse, looking through something and take your keys out and not get them back in. And then you can't find them anywhere. Forgetfulness. You take off your jewelry at night and lay it on the nightstand. But in the middle of the night, there's a part that gets up that's looking for their toy, knocks the jewelry off behind the headboard, and now you can't find it the next morning. There's just so much that happens that kind of feels like forgetfulness. What did I do with that? Like, I thought I put it right here, but maybe I didn't. There's a lot more than just one self state, than just the primary that's doing things. So there's a lot of forgetfulness, forgetting what day of the week it is. And that's really common, especially with a larger system, because again, not every part is living every day. And so you can lose time. Minutes, you can lose minutes, you get lost in a conversation, right? And suddenly in the middle of the conversation, you're like, I have no idea what we're talking about. You may have even been the one talking. I have no idea what we're talking about. Or who am I talking to? Who is this person? Like, that type of forgetfulness just doesn't happen anymore when you have full integration. And so it's surprising sometimes the things, your mental capacities that you get back for being able to track with your own life. And so that's another common indication of full integration. Those are kind of the top three I look for right away if someone has had a significant integration. I'm testing for those things. Some of the other ones that I have experienced with people that are less common and kind of go person to person, one is their body may feel different. One lady, when she integrated, she, like, a few minutes after it was in a healing session, and it was pretty significant. I can't remember, to be honest with you. I feel like this was her final integration. She had thousands of parts. I feel like this was her final, but it may not have been, as it was so many years ago. But it was a big one. And we ended the prayer and then we're just kind of debriefing and she's settling into this new state of normal. And then all of a sudden she just kind of had this surprised look on her face and she looks down at her arm and she just starts touching her arm. And I'm like, tell me what's happening. And she says, I feel my skin. She goes, I've never felt my skin before. She goes, I didn't know I didn't feel my skin. She's like, I feel my skin. And like, for the first time, she was in her body. Like, she felt her body. She felt solid. She felt like a person for the first time. That's a change in body. That's a change in how you feel physically. And that can happen with integration. Mostly I've seen that happen with really large systems, not necessarily with smaller systems, because the dissociation is just so much greater with a large system. Well, this one actually is in the Less common, but I would say I need to move this one up because this is super common as well. Emotions feel much stronger. And I'm going to talk about this when we talk about post integration. So I'm not going to go into great detail right here, but emotions tend to feel much stronger when you're integrated. And so that's another indicator that I will look for. And that is more observed than it is necessarily someone knowing that that's happening. The senses may be stronger. Again, this is more common with a larger system where things like your smell may have been dissociated, or some people will experience with integration, like it sounds like talking through a cotton wall all the time, like I don't hear things clearly. And then integration happens and you're like, wow, I can hear things now. Vision can change. Sometimes when you have a lot of parts, you can have blurry vision or see more out of one eye than the other, or even tunnel vision. This happens when people get really triggered sometimes, where instead of having peripheral vision where you can see out here, suddenly like these are the walls. You can't see past right here where my hands are. It's just this tunnel vision. So your vision can change with full integration. Taste, touch, like with the skin feeling. A lot of things may change with the senses. And then often there can be a sense of confusion. Well, what is this? Like it feels different. Is it good? Is it not good? There can be a sense of grief. And that kind of goes often with the mind being quiet, is where I'll see that grief happen, is losing parts. And I had a lady that when she integrated, she was sad because she's like, I lost my A team. Like they had my back. They were always there for me and we did everything together and now they've all integrated. And so she had some grief over losing her access to her parts. Of course, they were integrated and they were safe and happy, but she lost access to them. And so that was grieving for her. But she was still thrilled to be integrated. It just was hard. So these are some of the indicators of a significant integration. If you feel like something has changed, I think I may have integrated. One, I would say that that probably doesn't just happen. Like there's probably a significant something that happened that lead up to that. Sometimes when I'll work with people, it's happened with a couple people. One lady I'm thinking of in particular, she had her husband. And so if she would have a really good week, he would tell her, I think you've integrated. I think you're good now. And so he just was convinced, well, you've been great for like 5 days. So surely you've integrated now. And so she would just believe that. She's like, well, he says I have, and I do feel better. I feel great. And I'm like, nothing has changed. So I don't think there's a integration here. And there never was any of those times that that belief was there. But it was just this feeling of someone from the outside observing, oh, you've been calm and haven't been triggered for a week or a month. So I think you're whole now. And it's like, it doesn't really happen that way. Usually integration happens through a process and through like a significant change. I have had clients where God has integrated parts like overnight. He's integrated parts when that person wasn't aware of it, but we always find out. Like it's not just a guess or a feeling, but it's more, yeah, I've checked around. I know where this part usually is. I know what this part usually does, and that part is not there anymore. And now I'm doing what that part used to do. So there's always some proof or some evidence of the integration, not just, well, I felt better, so I must be better. That can go into denial and can kind of push those parts even farther back. So you got to be really careful with that. Okay, so we're going to move into kind of the steps to get to integration. Okay, so we've talked about what integration is like, what it's not like, and maybe you have a good picture of that now. Before we go into, I'm just going to tell you the next topics, because if we have, and I'm going to ask you for questions. So if you have questions on what I've said so far, you can be typing those in. What we're still going to roll into is how to get there, important steps to get to integration, things that you don't need for integration, post-integration work, and common blocks to integration. So we're going to now back up a step further into that process right before integration. But if you have any questions about integration itself that have not been addressed, go ahead and type those in. I will tell you as I'm giving you a minute to type here. So my book, Trauma Coping Systems, is available on our website or on Amazon. And a lot of what we've covered this morning is in this book. What we're going to cover for this next hour, not as much of it is in the book, but a lot of what we've covered is in this book. If you already have this book, it starts on page 161 is where I start talking about wholeness. And truly one of the few sources that actually goes into any kind of depth on integration that I found. If you guys know of any sources that goes into integration in the way that I'm discussing it, I'd love to know your resources because that is a hard one to find. Okay, let's see what we've got here. Yeah, so that's a great question that you have there. So there is a difference between that safe space internally and integration. So often, very often, especially if you do listening prayer, you may have a safe place internally where parts go. Well, before I did listening prayer with people, we still made a safe place for parts. And often it's a place in nature. So it may be a waterfall or a meadow or a garden, or I heard someone say a Grand Canyon, the Grand Canyon the other day, but it's often a beautiful place, often outdoors. And it's just that safe place where parts will go and they kind of gather there once they've had their healing or when they're working on healing, when they've chosen Jesus. That is different than integration, because when you have those safe places, that you can still go and interact with your parts there. And the people that are in the front of your head, the part of you that feels the most like you typically have access to those places as well, the waterfall or the garden or the meadow. With integration, the primary does not go into integration, not in any of the experiences I have had with people. And so when that integration happens, it will be in a place where you, as the primary, you don't go there because you don't integrate, you are you. And so that is an important distinction there. Peaceful place versus integration. Sometimes parts in the peaceful place are ready for integration. They just haven't been invited to integrate. And so I will occasionally just ask God if there are any parts that are ready for integration or that you're ready to integrate. Can we do that today? And just sort of make that invitation out there can sometimes be helpful. Okay, let's see. Okay, sure, absolutely. Emotions with parts are very big. Yes. Oh, that is a great statement there. So she says emotions with parts are very big. Yes, very big and can feel overwhelming, right? When your parts are feeling these big emotions and you're just overtaken by them. And so then she says, and you said emotions get bigger after integration? Yeah, help me with this one. So that is a really good point. In fact, I had somebody tell me the other day when we were working on helping her parts heal and kind of we were having a conversation about integration. She's like, I can barely function now with what's happening. Like I can't integrate and do this on my own. Um, so yes and no. The difference would be if you had a friend, a child or a friend, okay, that is having a complete meltdown. They are in crisis, they are in tears, you're hearing their story and it's just breaking your heart. You're like, oh my gosh, I'm so sad for them. Like I'm heartbroken. And your empathy is strong and you're connecting with them. And it's just overwhelming to think that this would happen to somebody that you know, that they would go through something this hard. That can be, I mean, I know people that their heart is just so connected. They're so relational and they're so connected with people that their friend having a crisis will keep them up at nights, right? And they're just like, I don't know how to help them. I don't know what to do. This is awful. This is unfair. Big, painful things. So the difference is between that happening to a friend of mine and me kind of being overwhelmed by it and just feeling pain with them. Like, how can I help you? How can I support you? My example is going a little into codependency here, but that's okay because we're going to relate this to parts if you're in that situation, versus me having the crisis. So if I have the crisis, it's going to feel bigger, right? Than what I felt for them. I felt really, really bad for them and it was overwhelming and it kept me up at night. But now it's my pain, it's going to feel even bigger. The difference is I can do something about my pain. Like there's not a lot I can do with their emotional pain, but I can do something with my pain. So that's the difference pre-integration and post. Pre-integration, that what those parts it's carrying is huge and it's overwhelming and you're feeling it too and you're trying to heal and help them and do internal communication and it's very, very overwhelming, right? But because it's you and them, there's less that you can do. Like it's separate because dissociation is separate, right? When you integrate, it's your problem now. You don't have a part that's carrying it for you. So it makes it more intense, but because it's your problem, you can choose what to do. Like you can learn the healthy things. You doing the breathing, doing the gratitude, talking to a counselor, doing whatever your techniques are is going to be more effective to help that emotion because it's just you and not a part two. So yes, more intense, but also the solutions are quicker and more effective than when it's apart. So hopefully that helps. Do parts need to be fully connected to Jesus and free of bondage before integration? No. In fact, often with groups of parts, what I will find is there will be one or two or a handful of parts in the case of a really large system that really connect with Jesus. And they are able to receive healing and whatever needs to resolve their conflicts, get rescued, whatever needs to happen. And then when they integrate, there will often be a whole group that integrates with those parts. And that's because they're all connected to the same conflict. They're all connected to the same situation. Each individual part doesn't need to necessarily have healing and choose Jesus. If the leaders of the group do, or the ones that are really managing the conflict do, then everybody else that's connected to that conflict can integrate at the same time. I love that about God's design because again, some of these systems are really, really large. And if each and every part had to have personal interaction, and that's honestly the way it used to happen, I would say until maybe about 20 years ago or so, when people worked with dissociation and specifically dissociative identity disorder, they would go part by part by part. And if you've got thousands of parts, like that just takes a long time because it's not part by part by part, but it's a part for a week, a part for a few months, a part for a few years. Like it takes a long time. And now I think God is just teaching us over the last couple of decades a lot of shortcuts for healing on this, where people can integrate in whole groups with only having a few parts that have actually had that one-on-one. Do you have a resource to find a spirit-filled person? Yes. So on our website under community resources, we have PDFs that list people that work with dissociation. And so you can go to traumacoping system kc.com/community resources. And I will put that on the handout as well. And you will see a download for counselors that work with dissociation. And everyone on there is a believer, and everyone on there we know personally at the Trauma Healing Center. Some do virtual work, some do not. So if you're not local to Kansas City, look for the ones that do virtual work. And we're adding to that list. As a little promo side note, That's one of our major missions here at the Trauma Healing Center, is to train people to work with dissociation so that we can have more and more counselors available that will help people like you, people like your clients, when you hit a situation where you're not sure how to help them or what to do next. And they don't work at the Trauma Healing Center. They work all throughout the community, and actually we're enlarging that to kind of be national. As you can see, even from our list today, we've got people that are all over the United States and a few in other countries. And so we're hoping to expand the list that we have now. But yes, we do have resources for you. Okay, let's see. I feel like some parts have integrated by Jesus alone, but you said I would know it, like I haven't heard from them. And there are tons of them. Yeah, Jesus can absolutely just kind of integrate some parts as he goes. The only time that you're going to really know it is if it's a significant integration. So the smaller integrations, I'll give you an example. Another lady I worked with, and her system wasn't super large, and she just was, I don't know, her approach to her internal system was very nurturing. That's very, very rare to see that. And so she had these two parts that were just in charge of really her appearance, like how she looked and her appearance. And they didn't really have a lot of trauma. And this is why it makes me smile, because I just think about their personalities. They just didn't have a lot of trauma. They were just there to help her, like, make sure she looked good and looked put together for people and for society. And we're doing deep trauma work with these other parts over here. And at some point we came to session, and some people are more visual internally than others. So she was very, very visual internally. And so I think that's also what brings the smile to my face, is because I can kind of picture what she pictured through her descriptions. She had a whole town, a whole city that her parts lived in. They each had their own house, and they had a community meeting spot and everything. She was very, very visual. Well, we came to session and she was kind of panicked, and she's like, oh my gosh. Like, I went to their house because the two of these parts lived together. She goes, and there was a note on the door. And this is what the note said: we're tired of all this trauma work, so we're going to the Bahamas. That was the note on the door. And I was like, oh my gosh, it just makes you laugh, right? So she's like, I don't know what happened. They're not in their house and we can't find them anywhere. So I'm like, okay, all right, it's fine. We'll just ask Jesus. Let's ask Jesus, they went to the Bahamas. Let's figure out what happened. So we brought Jesus in. We're like, okay, Jesus, what happened to these ladies? And he just sort of smiled too, much like I'm doing. He's like, yeah, they were kind of done. So I just integrated them. They're fine. They're just integrated now. And so we're all like, okay, good. They're fine. They're not at the Bahamas. Unless, he created a Bahamas for them to integrate to, I don't know. But so in that case, Jesus integrated them by himself, and there was no real difference in her. Like, she didn't feel quieter. It didn't affect her forgetfulness. They weren't really, she didn't have a physical impact. It was just Jesus said they're integrated, so they were integrated. And so if you have a system where you do have thousands apart, tons of them, then if you have 20, 50, 100 parts integrate, you're not going to notice that probably in your day-to-day life and functioning. But it's still a huge success. It's still a really, really big thing, because every group that integrates just takes you closer to full integration. You just have to keep moving that direction. So I hope that's helpful. It would be interesting, and maybe one day Jesus will answer this question for me, either to me or through someone else, but why, when a part is healed and rescued, they don't just automatically integrate? Because that does happen occasionally, but I would say it's far more common as parts get rescued that they kind of tend to gather and tend to kind of get in a space where they are still there. They don't have a lot of the same trauma, but they're still there. Now, sometimes that happens because just because a part is rescued doesn't necessarily mean they're healed all the way. And what I hear most often would be Jesus say something like, you need some healing now. You need some medical attention, or you need some cleansing from all the bad things that happened to you. And sometimes I'll even see or have clients tell me that they see the parts like be taken to to a special place where they can find rest, where they can sleep, where they have a comfortable bed, where they can heal. And so sometimes there's some healing that needs to happen even after a rescue before a part can integrate. Okay, let's see. And then Christy put the link up there for the resources if you guys are interested. Wondering the body impact and possible changes with sensory smell. Do you feel significant illnesses can be primarily or solely related to dissociation? Yeah, there are illnesses that can be connected to dissociation because dissociation has such a big impact on the body. Now, that doesn't, of course, mean that all are, but I will give you an example of chronic pain. So, a lot of people who struggle with chronic pain see a big reduction in that after integration because memory and emotions are often stored in the body. And so, you can have some chronic illnesses, some chronic pain that go away with integration because, or even just with healing those memories because of the healing that's happened. Another reason for that would be immunity. So if you think about your body, I mean, you kind of have a generator, right? We only have so much energy. All of us only have so much energy. So if we take this is my energy level, I have this much energy, that means I can only use up this much energy. So if you're spending all of this energy holding memories, all of this energy pushing back protectors, all of this energy containing this emotion so you don't have to feel it, you only have a tiny bit of energy left to fight sicknesses. And so you may be more susceptible to the common cold. You may be more susceptible to all kinds of things just because so much of your energy is going into maintaining your trauma coping system that you don't have enough energy to fight off sicknesses and illnesses and diseases. And so that's entirely possible. The short answer is yes, some physical illnesses can be tied to dissociation, but definitely not all of them. Some things are just kind of what you got. So question about primaries integrating. Not all primaries integrate. So 3 is kind of the normal number of primaries. I'd say the average, not the average, a normal number of primaries for a small to medium system. If you have a really, really large system, you can have maybe a dozen or so primaries. That's not uncommon. The primaries will all integrate into one. So what I'm talking about with the concept of full integration and wholeness would be you're down to one primary. You are just all you. Okay, great questions, guys. Okay, well, let's go on to the next section and then we'll do a few more questions at the end here if we have time. Okay, I'm not going to go through these in depth. These are the important steps to integration. Again, these are in my book and all throughout my YouTube channel. If you go to my YouTube channel, there's a tab, so there's different playlists, and one is on dissociation. So if you go to that dissociation playlist, you will see all kinds of videos that talk through much of what we're talking about today. I don't have a ton on there about integration, so this will be the first one, I think, when we put it on there, but these tools that I'm about to talk about right now will be on there in a variety of ways. So some of the things that need to happen to get to integration: resolving intolerable conflicts. That term, intolerable conflicts, I learned from Restoration in Christ Ministries with Diane Hawkins. I talk about it in my book. She does a lot of work with ritual abuse. And so a lot of her stuff, if you don't have ritual abuse, may seem kind of heavy for you. My book isn't targeted towards ritual abuse survivors, so it's a little bit more digestible sometimes if you are working through your own process. But intolerable conflicts are just those conflicts that say, I'm just going to die if this happens. I cannot survive if this happens. And those intolerable conflicts develop through trauma. And they are one of those primary factors that create parts. And so those intolerable conflicts need to be resolved. Internal communication, being able to be aware of your thoughts, being able to respond to your thoughts, being able to get into regular habits of doing that where you're not just trying to shut it down or stuff it, but being able to kind of connect with yourself more and more. You have to start small with that very often, but that skill should be growing as the months and the years go by. Being able to take ownership of your story. One of the big things with dissociation is its purpose is to help a child be able to compartmentalize part of their story, not think about it, not experience it, not even know that it happened. So we call that denial. And this is the wall that keeps the story over here, keeps me over here. And when you want to integrate, you have to get to these parts that are over here. And the only way to do that is to deal with the denial and to be able to say, okay, this is part of my story. This did happen, or that person was involved, or this was abuse, even though I've really tried to normalize it in my head. So there's a lot of different ways that we can go into denial, and we have to address those in order to be able to come to full integration. And then one of the big ones is, I'm going to see if I have this listed later, being able to feel your emotions. And I'm gonna spend just a minute on that one, because this is where I see one of the ways that I see people really get stuck is they really struggle to feel their emotions. Actually, I have it at the end, so I'm going to save it to the end because I feel like it's really important. So I want to give it as much time as I can, and I don't want to miss these other things. Okay, so this is an important note, and maybe a question has come up about this already, but people always ask. These are 4 things that you do not need for full integration. Can feel overwhelming when we talk about everything I've said so far, like what in the world, all of this stuff. Okay, these are 4 things you don't need. 1, you do not need full memory of every part of your story. I don't think that's happened with anyone that I have seen fully integrate. Sometimes integration can be scary because you're like, I don't think I can handle remembering everything that happened. Like I forgot it for a reason. Trying to remember everything, every bad thing that's ever happened to you, I don't know about you, but that sounds very re-traumatizing to me. That sounds like that would be awful, right? You don't have to remember every part of your story. When we go, especially through a listening prayer process, God knows the pivotal moments that need to be recalled. Like, I need to remember this so we can deal with what happened in that moment. But I don't need to remember every time that something bad like that happened, just pieces of the story. One of the ways that I'll describe memory when it comes to the memory of your story is with integration. So prior to integration, when you have all these walls, you can't necessarily just easily access these memories. Well, do you remember what happened when you were 6? No, I can't remember it at all. Post integration, it's like all of those memories go into a filing cabinet that does not have keys or locks. And so you're able to get to the memories if you need to. And that doesn't mean that you can remember everything easily, but it does mean you have access, which you don't have pre-integration. But you don't need to remember everything to integrate. You do not need to relive your past. You don't need to feel. It's important that you feel some of the emotions from the past and the pain from the past, but you do not need to relive all of those memories. That is not necessary for full integration. This is the question that came up. You don't need to communicate with each and every part. That is not necessary. Communication with some parts is absolutely necessary, and you need to be aware of what's going through your head. You can't pick and choose. You need to be present with yourself, but you don't need to have communication with every single part for full integration. And also, you don't need healing from all of your pain. I have worked with many people that have fully integrated, and then after integration, they still had to work with some of the pain of their trauma. And it just means that their capacity was big enough to do it as a whole person. They didn't necessarily need their parts to handle it for them anymore. So those are some of the things that you don't need for full integration. So this is may sound a little contradictory, but one of the common blocks that I've seen to integration is people wanting integration so badly that they actually create more denial and more dissociation. And that kind of goes to that microwaving that I mentioned before, that word that one of my clients uses is like, I just want it so bad. And so this has to be resolved now. This has to be done. And so in wanting it so bad, you actually stuff some of your memories and your emotions and your thoughts because you just want it so bad and you feel like I've dealt with this so many times. And so you push it aside. And that can actually prolong the process and take you deeper into dissociation. It's very hard because with trauma, it often feels like you're revisiting things often. And you're like, I've dealt with this. Like, why am I back here again? Well, very often we have to revisit things as we grow. We have to deal with different levels and different facets of the same traumatic experience. Healing from trauma is not linear. It's not deal with this, move it off, deal with this, move it off, deal with this. Okay, we're at healing. But one of the analogies I've heard lately is it's much more like a spiral. And you have this memory you have memories everywhere. Okay, but I only have two hands. So you have this memory over here. And it's more like, okay, I've dealt with this memory. We're moving on. We deal with this and we deal with this, and we've grown a little and we've learned a lot and we've had some integration. And like, what in the world? Why am I back at this memory again? Like, I thought I dealt with this. Did I not do it right? And it's like, no, there's just another layer. Like maybe the first time you dealt with just the fact that it happened, period, because that can be overwhelming, right? And you hit acceptance that it happened. Okay, thank God. And you got some healing and some relief. And then you're dealing with this and you're again building some capacity and you're learning some skills. And then you get back over here and it's like now you're dealing with the pain of it. You're actually feeling the emotional pain of this memory. And you're like, man, I thought this was healed. And why does this feel so awful? So God heals some of the pain from that memory. And then you're going around, you're dealing with this and dealing with that and building some skills and some emotional capacity. And are you kidding me again? I'll have people say, I don't know if this is my imagination. I know we've talked about this 100 times, but I'm seeing this memory again. I'm like, okay, let's work on it. So maybe now the memory is about a specific belief that got planted in your heart in that memory. And now that you accept the memory and you've dealt with enough of the pain that you can see the belief, now we're dealing with a belief. So there's a lot of different facets to one trauma experience or one memory that sometimes need to be dealt with. And sometimes it can't just be done all at one setting because there's a lot of other skills and things that need to come into play for that. I don't see that with everybody, but I do see that with some people. It's not uncommon at all. But sometimes we get frustrated with that. And so we're like, nope, I've already been here. Have you ever talked to somebody and they're like, no, I don't need to talk about that. I dealt with it. I'm fine. I dealt with it. Okay, well, if you're saying it in that tone, I don't know. I may question that you've dealt with it. To me, if you've dealt with it, means you can talk about it in a somewhat relaxed state of mind. It may still hurt, you may still cry a little, but you're not going to be defensive or angry about somebody bringing it up or completely refuse to talk about it. That tells me maybe there's another facet, right? Maybe another little aspect that needs to be dealt with there. And so if you get too heels dug in, I've dealt with it, it's over, it's done, you may miss something. And so it's important as those cycle around. And you can ask Jesus if you do a lot of prayer work with your healing journey, just ask him, God, if this is done, if I don't need to deal with this, if this is just Satan tormenting me, or trying to stir something up, then just take it away, Father. Like block it out. I don't want to go somewhere that's already dealt with. But if you've prayed that and it's still pressing in, then you need to ask the Lord, what else? What else about this memory or this trauma or this pain do you want to work on? Because we want full healing. We can't shortcut, we can't microwave the process. We want full healing. So those unresolved conflicts are another common block to integration. There's still a conflict there. Yeah, you visited it, you've rescued parts, you've had some relief and some healing with that memory, but there's still a belief. There's still a vow that you made. There's still something that happened in that memory that needs healing before integration can happen. Denial about aspects of the trauma. Maybe you fully believe all of your story. Yes, this happened. It's awful. I've accepted it. But I keep having this picture of my grandma, or I keep having this picture of my Sunday school teacher, of my mom, or of a sibling, and I just can't believe they were ever involved. I can't believe they ever knew. That piece of denial can keep you from integrating. And we don't just run off with everything that pops in our head as being true or a fact, right? But we also don't just completely say that's not possible. We have to be able to say, okay, help me know the truth, Father. Like, help me know the truth. It's so important. Lack of internal communication. So I've not seen someone fully integrate who was not able to connect internally, who shut down their thinking or shut down their thoughts or their emotions. That is your story. That is exactly what's cutting these walls down. What's bringing these walls down means I'm listening to what's going on over there. I'm hearing what the protector is saying. I'm helping this little one that's really sad. That internal communication is important. And if you're not doing that, it's going to be hard, if not impossible, to integrate. Lack of acceptance. So acceptance is actually the antidote to denial. And so accepting is being able to say, yes, this happened. Yes, these people were involved. Yes, I felt pain and do feel pain about it. But also, yes, I'm here today. Yes, I do have skills today. Yes, I have grown and I have changed and I'm not that person. Like, there's all kinds of layers to acceptance. And without continually growing in that sense of self-acceptance, it is very hard to integrate. And then the last three blocks to integration that I want to talk about are part of what I call the layered trauma response. And I don't have time to go into that in depth today because I want to do some more Q&A. I actually have had several people ask about it lately, and I've taught about it several times. So at some point, I'm going to just put out a video with this in more depth. But the layered trauma response is when the trauma is so intertwined that you can't deal with one thing without triggering something else. And you kind of take care of this issue, and then this issue gets bigger. And so it feels like you just can't stay with that sense of healing. You can't stay with that sense of relief. You lose it very quickly, even after a big breakthrough. With that layered trauma response, often there is a very triggering effect to very normal, traditional approaches. So things like gratitude can trigger suicidal thinking. Things like deep breathing makes you go into a panic attack. The things that are typically super helpful, grounding, gives you sensory overload. You can't do it. So a lot of what's super, super helpful is actually super triggering. So that can happen with a layered trauma response. But three of the blocks that I see people have when they have that layered trauma response, one is shame. They feel overwhelmed with shame. And when you have that perspective, let me see, I have some other notes on that. Your root belief usually comes down to something like, I'm bad or I'm not good enough. And what stems from that? Now, every person that has a trauma coping system is going to struggle with shame. That's normal for trauma coping systems. With the kind of trauma that creates trauma coping systems that causes them to develop. Shame is just a natural byproduct, right? But this is on a spectrum, and you have the shame that's always going to be there, but when it gets up high and it becomes kind of pervasive, which means it overtakes every perspective and every aspect of life, then when that shame is really high up here, you have this layered trauma response. And so this belief that I am bad or I'm not good enough, it infiltrates. That's that pervasive word, every aspect of life. So some of the things that someone might think or feel if they have really pervasive shame, they always take the blame for everything, most always. And they feel guilty even when learning a new skill. Like, well, learning this skill means I've been doing it wrong or I didn't know something already. I had somebody who was actually a high school student that was learning things in high school, academic things. And it felt so shameful to her because she's like, I should already know this. I'm like, you've never had algebra before. Like, how would you know this? But she still felt shame that she didn't know it. That's a very pervasive shame. Um, Perfectionism or overconfidence. Sometimes you hear perfectionism talked as a product of pride. Like if you're a perfectionist, then you're just prideful because you think you know everything. Maybe, but I see perfectionism far more often has a root of shame and a root of people that are trying to prove that they are good enough, trying to counteract the voice in their head that tells them that they're not. And so that shame root can come out that way. Self-doubt, indecisiveness, fear of punishment, um, feeling unredeemable, struggles to receive forgiveness. If you have that pervasive shame, forgiveness is really hard to receive. God still gives it freely. And people, someone you know may give it freely, but it's hard to believe it's real and it's hard to really receive it. Inability to distinguish between sin and just a mistake or just a level of immaturity or undevelopment. Like it feels like everything needs repentance. Like if I make the smallest mistake, I need to repent. That's really this pervasive shame that kind of takes over everywhere. So that can be a block to healing because even healing feels shameful. Just the fact that I need to heal, I feel ashamed. The fact that I have a trauma coping system, I feel ashamed. Like that shame can really kind of clog up that healing process and slow things down. Um, Fear is another one that can become very pervasive. And again, with a trauma coping system, we have this spectrum. You're going to have fear. There's going to be fear there because there are parts that are probably still trapped in pain and trauma and they're scared. And so there's going to be fear. But as that fear gets stronger and stronger, it becomes more and more pervasive and can really make moving forward in the healing process difficult. Someone who triggers easily and regularly is dealing with that fear. They kind of constantly live in a self-protective mode. It feels like everything is dangerous and nothing is safe. They see danger first in most situations. This is a very simple word, okay, but this can be triggering for people that have a lot of fear, and that is the word safe because it feels like as soon as I think I'm safe, bad things will happen. And so just the thought of safety, if you're working with them and you're like, this is a safe place, you can say things to me or you can feel things, you may have already lost them right there because there's no safe place. And as soon as I believe there is, something bad will happen. And so that fear makes it hard for them to relax their nervous system if we talk biologically, but it makes it hard for them to believe that there can be anything good. They struggle to enjoy positive things, kind of for the same reason. That feeling hopeful or feeling happy or feeling like something good is happening feels very, very scary to them. So that's when that fear is very pervasive. So, both with the shame and the fear as blocks in a healing journey, one of the things that I find really effective is to do some generational work there because often the shame and fear are rooted generationally. And so we want to do generational work on that. And this isn't the class on how to do that, but I'm just kind of giving you some tips. We want to do generational work, and then we want to work on like habits and mindsets and conflicts where that fear and shame is rooted. But until you do the generational work, sometimes it's really hard to make progress in the other areas. And so don't neglect that. And then the third area, and this is what I started to talk about earlier and then waited, where I see some of the biggest blocks in integration. And this may be, it's already come up in the questions at least once today. This may be one of the hardest aspects of healing and integrating. Feeling emotions. Emotional pain can be so debilitating and so overwhelming. Whether you have parts or not, whether you have a trauma coping system or you're whole, emotional pain can really shut you down. And one of the terms that I will use and even do generational work that this falls in the category of is perpetual dissociation. When you really struggle to feel emotions. I've had people say, I don't want to. I've had people say, I don't have time to feel emotions because I have to live a productive life. And if I let myself feel the emotions, my functioning is going to drop to nothing. Like I can't do that. I can't afford to do that. And so what I often say is if you can't do it, somebody else has to. So if you have a trauma coping system and you can't do it, somebody else has to. You need parts to do it for you. So you're not going to be able to integrate if there's an aspect of your being, like emotions and feelings, that you are unable to embrace. You're going to have to need your parts. They're just going to have to be there to help you. And so integration really needs for that primary to be able to take on some emotional pain. And that stinks. Perpetual dissociation, just continually stuck dissociating, can happen when you don't know how to embrace those emotions. You can't do it all at once. You have to grow in it. You have to grow that emotional capacity because otherwise you're just going to keep shutting down over and over again. So it's a process. It's not a switch that you flip. The switch is deciding I want to do this. Like at least I want to try this. That's a switch you can flip, but that's not going to just dump all the emotions on you because truthfully, typically parts are like, yeah, you want to try it, but you can't handle it. You couldn't handle it then, you can't handle it now. And they're not going to just dump it all on you because they don't trust you to handle it. And so there's going to be a process in building that emotional capacity, but you need to be at least a little bit willing to start that process. Let's see. Yeah, so that's a great question. I'm going to hit these points and then I'll answer the question that popped up on the primaries. I actually had someone else ask that exact question in the class I did in September. So it's a good question. Post-integration work. So I'm going to hit these lightly. These are in my book, pretty heavy too. So you can get more details on these. As I mentioned before, a lot of people think, oh, I integrated. Yes, no more counseling fees. Like I am out of here. This is going to be amazing. And it just doesn't work that way. I've not seen it work that way with one single person. There's post integration work that needs to be done. One lady that integrated, she had a larger system, but she didn't have ritual abuse. She just had a lot of different types of trauma. And she fully integrated, and it was amazing. She worked her tail off to get there. It was painful, it was difficult. She actually recorded her testimony for us, which we play in some of our trainings that we do. She fully integrated, and post integration, she absolutely hated it for about a year. It took her a year to adjust to being integrated because it was hard. It was way harder than she ever thought it would be. Now she's the only one that's had that reaction for that long that I've worked with. Most people, it's uncomfortable and it's difficult, but they're able to grow within a couple months and kind of get their legs under them, if you will. But she really, really, really struggled with integration. Now it's been for her 6 years, I think, since she fully integrated. She has her own ministry. She's thriving. She loves it. She doesn't regret it at all. But it took a lot to get there. So post integration, there's still going to be some work. You're going to have to build some skills. There's a lot of things that your parts dealt with that you never had to deal with. You thought you had to deal with it because you had to deal with them dealing with it, but you weren't really dealing with it yourself. And so post integration, you're going to have to learn some relationship skills. You're going to have to learn about boundaries. You're going to have to continue to grow your emotional capacity. Every person does that for their whole life. Grow their capacity to handle hard things. You're gonna have to learn some life skills. Maybe you had a part that was in charge of all the bills, and now you're like, I don't know how to pay the bills. You're gonna have to learn some life skills post integration. You're gonna have to figure out what a support system looks like, because that's gonna look different post-integration than pre-integration. Not everybody's gonna need to know your story. You're not gonna be triggered as easily, so you're not gonna need the same level of support and care that you did pre-integration. You're gonna be adjusting to new perspectives and new beliefs. You're going to be adjusting to new abilities, new ways of functioning, being able to do things quicker, and then still having 4 hours of your day that you have to figure out what to do with. Like there's just going to be some new things that you're going to have to adjust to. And there may need to be additional healing for grief, like with my one client that really didn't like it for a while. My other client who said her A team was gone and was just really sad over it. There may still be some trauma memories and some unresolved conflicts that you need to work through. That's much easier to do whole in a way. I mean, it's easier because you get to make the choice for you. You get to make the choice versus you helping them. And there is a difference there, pros and cons to it for sure. And that doesn't happen for everybody, but some people still have to resolve things after integration. And so it's not a cure. I did an interview with Junie Felix, who is very into helping people heal with dissociation. She actually did an interview with Marcus Warner and myself on dissociation. And one of the questions she asked was, is integration a cure for DID? And I think she was wanting me to talk about integration, but I said, I want to actually talk about the word cure because no, dissociation is a coping mechanism, right? And dissociation is a process of getting through DID or trauma coping system is a healing process. But once you reach integration, turns out you're still human, and turns out you're still going to have problems, and you're still going to have to grow in areas, and there's still going to be really hard days. It's not the cure, meaning your problems are done, because we still have to heal and grow in so many other areas. That is our Christian life. And God wants to bring us to new levels of growth and healing all the time. And so it's not the cure, meaning your problems are done. It just means your dissociation is gone. The big dissociation, because we can still dissociate some even as a whole person, right? But you're still going to have things you have to work through. You still have to grow. And so work for it, work towards integration. If some of what we've talked about sounds appealing to you today, but don't set it on this pivotal hill of it's the end all, because there's life after integration and some of it is still hard. You can, with the bigger emotions, so we've talked about this once, I'm going to wrap around to it again. With the bigger emotions, it also means that you can feel things like contentment and happiness and joy bigger than you did when you were dissociated. So it's not just the painful emotions that are bigger. It's all emotions. You just have a bigger capacity for them. And so there's a good payoff for that. And I've not worked with somebody who has regretted it forever. Like regretted it for a season, maybe not. I wouldn't even say regret it, just didn't like it, but didn't want to go back either. Like just struggled with it would be what I would say. But most people adapt to it pretty quickly. So let's talk about primaries for a minute with this question, and we're going to just do Q&A for the last 10 minutes. So if you have another question, you can type it in. So I've had a couple people ask and say things like, my primaries have gone away, like they're no longer living my life, it's my alters. Why are the self states doing everything and not the primaries? So typically that's because the primaries are very overwhelmed. Now, there can be several different reasons, but this is the most common one I see, is the primaries became overwhelmed. One of these blocks to integration is often the cause. The emotions were just too big, or it felt too impossible. They just were feeling often, I can't do this, I just can't do this, I can't go on. And if they can't do it, somebody else has to. And so often those other self states will take over. And sometimes it's a matter of this journey's just too long. I've been doing this for decades. I've been doing this for so long, and I just can't keep doing it. And so the primaries will just shut themselves down. Now, sometimes the alters will shut them down, and they will say, you can't handle this, and they will push the primaries out of the way. But typically that can only happen if the primaries are kind of willing to get out of the way. And they're kind of like, I really didn't want to deal with it anyways. And so there's usually some levels of denial there for the primaries, or just emotional overwhelm. You need to work on being able to feel emotions. Part of that I've seen with a shame root, not always, but sometimes there's shame tied to feeling emotions. Like, I shouldn't feel these emotions, that's shameful. And so then between the emotional overwhelm and the shame, the parts are just like, no. The primaries are like, no, I just can't. I can't, because it feels too bad, and it feels bad to feel bad. And um, so working through that can sometimes be really helpful. No, the primaries may, so she's saying that sometimes her primaries occasionally do come back out and say they're better. Are they lying? And I would say no. Maybe they've had a level of healing. Um, it's very rare that I would hear a part, especially a primary, lie about that. It's more common that I would see a protector say, I'm fine, I don't know what's wrong with you, and the protector's not fine. That I would say would be more common. It may be that that primary has grown in capacity a little bit and is feeling a little better. So they come out and they're like, hey, I'm doing better. But then they're like, oh, okay, but this is still really bad. And so they go back in. That could be possible. It could also be, again, that the self states are like, we do not trust you to handle this. And so we are going to continue to block you out. And in that case, the thing to work on there is internal communication, being able to really validate the self states, listen to what they're saying, not disregard their reactions and their responses. Week 4 of treating yourself well. So again, my YouTube channel, Christy posted the link to the dissociation playlist on my YouTube channel, just a couple comments up. Week 4 of treating yourself well talks about talking to these protector parts and the way to have really good communication with them. And one of the purposes is that helps build trust between the primaries and the self states, because you need to build trust there for the self states to let the primaries do the work. So the first one is emotional overwhelm, could be why the primaries go away. The second one would be this mistrust between the self states and the primaries, keeps a block there. And then, of course, spiritual warfare could be part of it too. I've seen that less common, but it merits mentioning. If you do listening prayer, you can ask Jesus about it too. And just say, I would even say the 3 and say, hey, is it one of these 3? Is this why the primaries aren't there, or is it something else? And just see where you go with that. Okay, so someone's stating, I've noticed that the good emotions are the hardest for people in post-integration. And I would say good emotions can be very hard, and often that comes down to that shame or fear, because it feels unsafe to feel good emotions. It's felt that way your whole life. So then allowing those good emotions there can feel false, it can feel fake, it can feel dangerous, and it's a whole new capacity. I feel like our emotional capacity grows for different emotions. It's not just one big bucket. And if I can feel this much shame, then I can feel this much joy. But if I can feel this much fear, then I can feel this much contentment. And it's like, no, we have to grow in different areas. We have to increase our capacity to feel sadness, but then also increase our capacity to feel happiness. And so we take that in steps and we grow in each of those areas. And that's okay. That's healthy and it keeps you from overwhelm. And so you just kind of have to work through it at a good pace. Other questions? I'll give you just a few more minutes to pop up what you got. I am passionate about healing. I'm passionate about people working through the journey. It's hard work. It's really hard work. And for any of you that are in the thick of it, I just speak life and blessing to you because you need strength and you need supports. You need people that can help you through it. Like I said, I'll put a few different links on your handout when I send it. I just want to point out a couple different books to you, and I'm missing one that I wanted to show you. I've already talked about my trauma coping system book. There's a devotional as well. The devotional, I do this on my YouTube channel, chapter by chapter. So under that same dissociation playlist, you don't need to buy the book if you don't want, because I literally read the chapter and then I talk a little bit about it. And a lot of people have found this very helpful in going through their healing journey and kind of normalizing a lot of what's happening to them. The other resource that I thought I brought in here, and I don't see it over here, is my latest book, which is A Healing for Your Child. Now, this is not for your inner child. This is for if you're a parent and you have a child who has experienced something traumatic. This is a 21-day prayer guide to help pray through some things for your child. This is not an all-encompassing path of healing for your child, but this is addressing a lot of the spiritual warfare that comes along with childhood trauma that is just not addressed in a lot of places. So things like generational curses. Do you say like, yeah, there's sexual abuse all throughout our family, or there's alcoholism all throughout our family, or so many people have experienced car accidents in our family, or death at a young age. Well, have you done a generational prayer over that? Because that may be important to do. Ungodly relationship bonds, which are really important to break, especially with perpetrators and with people that are harmful in your life. Resolving internal conflicts, strength for the parent in the journey. And so there's a lot of different things that need to be addressed from a spiritual warfare perspective. If your child has experienced trauma, you can really give them an edge up, get them in counseling, get them in play therapy, but do this warfare for them as well. And that book is available on Amazon, as are all my others. If you go to any of my books and just hit on the author where my name is, it'll take you to the list of all my books that are there. There's a couple more questions. Let me get those before we move on. If you are feeling slow in your therapy process, so she's asking if you're seeing a counselor and it was going well, but now it feels kind of like it's slowing down and like you're not making progress. When do you know if you need to look for somebody else? And I would say a lot of the process can seem very slow. And so you want to kind of stick with it for a little bit. Does it feel like you have a purpose when you go to session? Does it feel like things are getting stirred up? Does it feel like you're having new insights, at least occasionally? Or does it just feel like we're in a rut where we talk about the same thing every time? I don't feel any emotions anymore. Like things just feel blah. You may need to maybe look at a new something or other. I think before you just ditch the person you're working with, maybe explore some options. Because it may just be that this is a slow part of your journey and you're just building some capacity. So take that slow. Okay, we've got one more question. I know we're at time. So if you need to go, you can. But I'm going to get this last question before we wrap up. I have a friend who's healing from dissociation and has the devotional, but it was too triggering. Yeah, absolutely. It's just like when I started today and I said, this may be very triggering. I'm 3 minutes in and you may have already been so triggered you can't stay with me. It's a lot. Reading books, there's a lot of people who cannot read books on dissociation. I would just encourage you and your friend, take it slow if you're triggered. Don't just stop, but take it slow. Sometimes we think, oh, wow, these are great for healing. I'm going to read them tonight. Like I'm taking a day off work. I've got my blankets and my stuffed animals and my hot chocolate, and I'm going to dive in and get healed. Well, you probably can't handle that. That's a lot. Like any of us that are overcoming something big in our life, we got to take it small and a step at a time. And so maybe with a devotional, maybe it's one devotional a month. Maybe it's half a devotional a month. Maybe you skip around. Maybe, I mean, the first one it starts out with is God, and that's a hugely triggering topic for a lot of people. So maybe you skip the God part and you go to a section that feels like you can handle it a little bit better. Maybe you do the videos instead. Maybe that's better than this because I go at it a little softer. Um, just go slow and don't, if there's one aspect that's triggering, just go at it from a little bit different angle because that can be really, really helpful. All right, guys, we are going to get ready to wrap up here. I'm so glad this has been helpful for you guys, and I'm glad that you were able to attend. Like I mentioned in the email, I will try to get a video out to you guys. Thank you to Wendy, I think it was, who reminded me to record, and then I think Christy got everything going for me. So my team, that I didn't even know I had a team today, but it was amazing. You can, the easiest way, if you have not found my YouTube channel or my books, is to go to melissafinger.com. And that I try to keep that updated, although I don't think my new book's on there yet, with the resources and a link to the YouTube channel. Please subscribe if you're not a subscriber. That helps me with, I'm trying to get up to a certain level so I can do some more live Q&As on YouTube because we have a pretty good YouTube audience that seeks this information, and that gives me access to more tools if I can hit a certain subscriber number. So feel free to subscribe there if that's something that you do. We will be doing an open house that is both in person and virtual here at the Trauma Healing Center in December. The link for that's on our website if you want to check it out. It's the first Thursday, I think it's maybe December 5th, the first Thursday in December. We're going to be talking about what we did this year and then some things that we have scheduled for next year that we're really excited about. And so if you come in person, it's kind of come and go for those of you that are local. If you just want to hop on virtually, the time is listed on there for when we'll be doing a presentation. And so you can just hop in for the presentation. But I appreciate you guys today. Let me check on here. Anything else that I need to address? All right, let me pray for you guys and wrap you up, all right? Father, thank you so much for today. Thank you for each and every person who has attended and who will be viewing the recording. You see the journeys, you see the growth, and you see the healing that is still yet to come. And just speak life and blessing to each of these journeys, Father, and each journey that's represented here by a helper. I ask, Father, that you would continue to move people forward, that you would give them some anchor and some grounding to you and to whatever it is that they need to hold on to that will help them to keep taking one step after another. I ask for new insight and revelation for each person here, Father, and I ask that you would just show yourself in your faithfulness and in your kindness to them. Just take authority over the lies of the enemy that he's spoken to them about their dissociation, about their trauma. I bind them and I ask that those lies would be silenced, Father, and that you would just make a part in their journey, just part some of the waters for them, Father. Give them some dry land to cross so that they can see that you are working and see what's next. And maybe just have some more stable footing. I thank you, God, for your power in that. I ask that you'll prohibit all retaliation for the work that you're doing, destroy every backup plan, cancel any assignments or harassments against any of us engaging in this lesson today. our families, our property, our personal domain, and our sphere of influence. In Jesus' name, amen.